Indian sword with a really small hilt, you're just not holding it right. Hi folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria. Now, there are 2 points of views about the smallness or tightness of some, I'll come back to that, Indian sword hilts. And I picked this example because this is quite small, but I can hold it. But it's uncomfortable. This is incidentally as a imported to India, German back sword blade from the 18th century that probably in the 18th century, perhaps 19th, early 19th, has been mounted with a local hilt. There were huge numbers of European blades, mostly German, exported to India from the 16th, 17th century onwards, and they were mounted on local hilts, all different styles of hilts, sometimes basket hilts of various types, and these kind of what we normally associate with a tulwar type hilt. Now, lots of Indian swords, for any of you that come across the antiques, will find that very often they have very small hilts. Now, the 2 points of view I mentioned. At one extreme, we have people who go, and this goes back to historical sources as well. People in India are much smaller. India's a big place. A lot of people, a lot of different variation. Anyway, Indian people are smaller. That's why they have smaller hilts on their swords. And that's why you find it painful to grip one of their swords, because it's a tiny hilt made for a 19th or 18th century Indian person, and you're a 21st century European or American, whatever you might be. Okay, that's one point of view. Other end of the spectrum, and obviously this is a spectrum, other end of the spectrum is, no, there's nothing wrong with that hilt, it's just that you're not holding it correctly. You need to extend the front finger or put it over the guard or hold it not in the palm of your hand but between the fingers of the hand like this. I've heard all of these. These are all explanations that I've encountered, particularly in the Indian martial arts communities, because in some cases modern Indian people, or people of Indian heritage, should we say, because they might be British or Canadian or whatever, are picking up Indian swords and going, well, that hilt's really small. So these are the two extreme views, and as always in real life, often the truth lies somewhere in the middle. Maybe we need to accept that these are tight hilts and you need to grip them in certain ways, and for someone who's familiar with something, for example, like a Japanese katana, this is an antique Edo period example, then that will be a completely different way of gripping it to an Indian sword or a European sabre or a medieval arming sword or whatever. Okay, so yes, that's one thing. Another thing is, yes, demographics and populations have changed slightly. So on average, most people, certainly in the Western world, are getting more nutrition and growing a bit bigger than they did in the 19th or 18th century. So we're a little bit taller, a little bit bigger, a little bit meatier, it has to be said. So an average 19th century Indian would probably, an average one would not be carrying as much weight as an average modern Western person. So that's a factor as well. And also there's the element, and I've mentioned this in previous videos, of social class as well. There's a tendency for people further up the social spectrum to have better nutrition and to be a little bit bigger, and this is even observable in modern societies, modern Western societies. But I think was certainly, as far as the evidence we have available, was the case in medieval Europe, and it was almost certainly the case in 18th, 19th century India as well. Okay, so this is a tight hilt. Okay, so we apply all of these things I've said to all Indian swords having tight hilts. But then I come along to this one, and I can easily fit my hand in this, no problems at all. So what I'm basically saying is, I think the people who say, oh, that hilt's not too tight for you, it's just that you're not gripping it right, are wrong. Okay, because there are lots of Indian swords, and I tend to keep the ones that fit my hand pretty well. And I have had some that are too big for me as well, I have to say. It's not all of them are too small, some are too big. But this Indian sword, which I've had for quite a few years now, probably a decade or more, actually fits my hand fantastically. Okay, fits it perfectly. If this was made for me by the maker, if I've travelled back in time to the 18th century and got this made for me, this is how it would fit. This is how a tulwar is supposed to fit someone's hand. Comfortably, the whole hand fits inside. Yes, the disc pommel encourages you to cut in certain ways, cutting with the arm rather than with the wrist. Absolutely. However, my hand fits comfortably into this. So my conclusion, therefore, is if I was an 18th century Indian person, then this sword fundamentally was not made for me. The hilt is a little bit too, while I can hold it and I could use it, it's not comfortable to use. So fundamentally, my argument has been for a long time now that, first of all, not all Indian people in the 18th and 19th century are necessarily smaller than 6'1", you know, however many pounds I am, 13¼ stone. Matt Easton, some of them were about the same size as me, or certainly had the same size hands as me. That's the first thing. The second thing is that clearly it's not that I'm gripping the weapon wrongly. I can grip some swords perfectly well, and I don't need to stick extra digits outside. But swords are just one reference point, and I've got 3 objects here which are very specific and only really have one way of being gripped, and that is the famous Indian qatar, or punch dagger. Okay, now this has a place for your hand in the middle, and in none of the art that I've ever seen anyway does it show any of the fingers extending outside of those bars. So this is the width of the hand. Can I get my hand into this? Not really, it's a little bit too small for me, okay? If I do it with only 3 fingers and have one finger, my pinky finger outside, yes, I can hold it, yes, I can use it. But this is not traditionally how they were used. They were traditionally used with all 4 fingers between those 2 bars. And my hand doesn't really, I can just about squeeze it in with this, but it's pretty uncomfortable. Now it has to be said, yeah, okay, if I let those knuckles come through to the front, then indeed I can hold it a bit more easily than trying to put the whole fist in. But if I do that, my knuckle is now banging against that base of the blade there and is going to hurt me quite a lot if I impact something with it. I've got another example here, which is a higher quality, in fact it's Woot's made one, and this one is about the same but in a slightly different shape. So I've got slightly more space for my knuckle here, although it's rounded rather than pointed, but the width is about the same on the hand. It's not really big enough for my hand. So the person who these were made for to fit had a smaller hand than me. It's as simple as that. How do I know that? How do I know I'm just not gripping it right? Because here's another one. This is an even higher status one. You'll notice it has gold Koftgari all over it. I can hold that perfectly comfortably. So, if you find the right ones, 6'1" Western European 21st century white man, me, can hold this qatar completely comfortably and can hold this talwar completely comfortably. I don't have to change my grip. I don't have to do any weird fingers outside of the guard, or overlapping anything like that. I can hold them comfortably. So my conclusion is, first of all, it's evident that there were lots of, or certainly some people in 18th, 19th century India who were the same kind of size and shape as me, at least in their hands. Okay, so it's not that they were all smaller than me or anything like that. So that's one extreme dealt with. The other extreme is, well, lots of these weapons I can hold normally. I don't need to do some weird grip in order to use them. I can just put my hand in and use them exactly like is shown in the period artwork, which I have studied to some extent. So, conclusion is that these weapons were made for specific individuals. Some of those individuals were the same size as me, or at least had the same size hands as me. Inevitably, the majority of them, it seems, were probably slightly smaller than me or had slightly smaller hands than me. And that might even be true in the modern world. I don't know. I haven't taken a cross-section of everyone's hands. But the basic point here is that Indian weapons that are tight-fitting to the hand, whether it's a qatar, a kanda, a talwar, a pata, they were made to fit the hand of the person they were made for. And sometimes you might inherit or buy or steal a weapon that doesn't fit you perfectly. It might be a bit big, might be a bit small, and you use it anyway. That's fine. That happened, I'm sure. But a lot of the antique weapons that you will find available today to buy through the antique market will be too small for most modern people, regardless of whether you're from India or America or UK, Canada, wherever. Okay, they will be a bit too small for you, but some of them will be big enough for you. And I do not buy it. In fact, I call BS on the people who say, oh, you have to grip it in a specific way. No, that's just a compromise because you've got a weapon where the grip's too small for you. I'm not saying it's not wrong to compromise, and that's a get around. If your hilt is too small and you've got to fight with that weapon, yes, by all means, find some compromise whereby you can grip it, like I showed with sticking the finger outside the bar here. But that's not what they were intended to be used like. That's not why they were built like that. Okay, don't buy that at all. Now, a final parting thought is that this does have a relation to some weapons from other areas and other periods, not just talking about Indian weapons now. If, you know, a plain example that we could use is Viking era or migration era swords, which sometimes have very short grips and very tight to the hand, and we talked about how to grip them and various other things. But I think we also have to consider that as well as specific ways of gripping them, hilts were made to suit certain individuals. And it has to be said, there are some, not many, but there are some Viking Age hilts which are relatively long, you know, 10 to 11 centimetre grips. But there are some that only 6.5, 7 centimetre grips. So they vary quite a lot, and clearly, therefore, they were made for different people, different sizes, different hand sizes and different preferences. We could also use an example I've noticed recently, is that there is a tendency amongst antique katana, like this example, which has a 17th century blade, Edo period, so probably 19th century tsuka. They tend to be shorter than replica ones, the total hilt length. But you've got to bear in mind, again, that the users of these swords on average would have been smaller than me. But there's also questions about how these were being used. If you're using this predominantly with wakizashi in the other hand and really using it predominantly as a single-handed sword, then indeed you don't need a particularly long grip. In fact, you might not want a particularly long grip. So there's many reasons why someone might want a shorter grip. But for modern Budo training and modern sort of preferences, most modern recreated replica katanas have longer grips than most of the antiques have. So again, it comes down to preference, and always we have to ask, am I getting this built with a modern replica? Am I getting this built in this way because it's what I want, or because it's historically correct? And is it historically correct to the people who used it, or is it proportioned to me? It's an interesting and very complex topic. Anyway, thanks a lot for watching. I hope to see you back on the channel again soon. I have been Matt Easton, and I will continue to be. Cheers, folks. Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers, folks.